Last session of the day, you're in for a treat. We're very lucky to have Rabbi Dweck, who's the senior rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese community, who's been here for a number of years now, originally also a while from over the pond, and was the head of a Jewish primary school and is very much about college program. He's up there. He's upstairs there. I've seen him. Sorry about that. And what I think Rabbi Dweck often does is raise the bar thoughtfully about what we're doing in Jewish education. He's got some interesting ideas that want to challenge the way we think about Jewish education, and so we have given you the opportunity to challenge us about principles of Jewish education. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Rabbi. Raising the bar. I don't know if it's raising the bar, but what I hope to speak with you about for the next hour is the title for the class is "Have We Lost the Big Picture? Teaching." What was it teaching?
Jewish Principles.
Jewish Principles. So if I can, I'd just like to know, I mean, I know I have names, but you'll forgive me for not knowing everyone. I think that it's worth it for me to take a very brief amount of time, and I'd just like to know what your position is in the school, if you're in a school. Can we do that? Do you mind if we do that really quickly? Yeah? All right, so we'll start.
Shelley Abrams from Liverpool, King David, and I'm the JS teacher,
Teacher, okay.
primary school.
Okay.
Peter Gillis, I was head of Kodesh in the primary school, and then I'm in London as a consultant.
David Book, Northwest Barry Jewish Day School, and I'm the head of Kodesh.
Sorry?
Head of Kodesh.
Head of Kodesh, yeah.
I'm a Kurdish teacher at Menorah Foundation.
Okay.
Chava Mala, teaching assistant in immersion.
All right.
Tamar Cohen, head of Kodesh at Wilson
Where is that?
Southgate.
Pleasant. Yes.
I'm Daniela Shannon. I do special needs Kodesh in Karen Primary School.
Leah Blake, head of infants of Kodesh in Menorah Foundation.
This is Naima, Kodesh teacher in Hasman Primary School.
Esther Jody, head of Kodesh at Lowen Primary School.
Lindsay Taylor Goodhart's teach here at LSJS, and I'm going to be teaching on the BA Jewish Education.
Lovely. Okay.
Felicia Epstein, we know each other, connected to LSJS.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm Esther Spitzer. I'm Kodesh teacher at Bolton Jewish Primary School.
Rochelle Pearl, Kodesh teacher at Bolton Jewish Primary School.
Iskon McNall, head of Kurdish and Menorah Foundation.
Darrell Lex, head of Jewish Studies at Bolton Jewish Primary.
Howard Hirsch, Vice Principal at KPS.
Justin Ketz, I'm head of Kodesh at Saxon Russia.
Josh Antian, Jewish Studies and Ivrit, Sinai.
Welcome, everyone. It is my honor and pleasure to be here with you today. Anyone who takes their time, certainly dedicates their life to teach the children of Klal Yisrael, are no doubt of the most important and the most cherished and treasured among our people. And I'm not just saying that to sound grand. I mean that very seriously. It is the most important thing that we do, obviously, to make sure that our children know what it is that the Torah is and how it belongs to them and how it is that they're supposed to live their lives within its framework. What more can we do for them? What greater thing can we do for them? And so what I'm going to share with you during this time that we have together is, in my experience, both in terms of my learning and in terms of my practice, what the possibilities are, what the chiyuv is, and how we deal with that in terms of our opportunities to be able to teach the children that we have the opportunities to teach. I will say, I know that it's on the bio, but I'll just mention. So I headed a Jewish day school. It doesn't talk about the Jewish day school, so I'll share with you very quickly what it was. Arkai Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. It's a primary school. It goes from 2 years old to 13 years old, and it is a very unique school. But the major difference about that school, as opposed to all the other Jewish day schools, both in New York, tri-state area, the rest of the country, and pretty much the world, is that we taught the children, teach the children, the entire 5 books of the Torah. They completed by the time that they're 11 years old, boys and girls. And the boys, although that's probably going to change, well, I'm not there, but the boys completed Seder Moed also in Mishnayot by the time that they were 13. This was done, tried and true. It happened under my guidance, under those that came before me, and it's continuing those that are leading the school after me. And I want to speak to you a little bit about that, why we do that and how we do that, and I want to broaden it in terms of the questions of principles itself. So I'll open. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to just take one and pass it. I don't know if we probably have extras with a little bit of sources on it. So I'm going to ask you, very simply, not as a challenging question, just as to help, because I like to what's our chiyuv as far as teaching our children Torah? Halachically. No one?
The children.
Yes. To teach our children, what's our chiyuv? What is our chiyuv in teaching our children Torah? No, huh? Is it because you're English or because... it's been a long day?
Our own children or our pupils?
Halachically, what is our requirement to teach our children? I'm sorry? That's the requirement to do it. What is the requirement to teach? What must we teach? What's the chiyuv? Is that a chiyuv?
Chamesh Mikra.
What is it?
The Pirkei Avot says what they should be learning, what ages.
Sorry?
The Pirkei Avot, it says what age they should be learning.
Yes, it does, correct. But that's not a discussion of what we have to teach. It's a discussion of when a person is ready to study those particular things. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. Second side of the page. Halacha l'maaseh, brought in the Rambam, it's passed in the Shulchan Aruch. Haya minhag hamedina likach melamed et tinokot zachar noten lo scharo. Now this is taken from as an excerpt from a broader halacha, where the Rambam has said very clearly in the first perek of Hilchot Talmud Torah that the requirement of teaching, first of all, is parents to children, correct? Correct? Yes? Do you have any dissension? Yeah. So as parents to children, as you said, Vishinantam levanecha, right? So the only requirement in Torah of teaching is from parent to child. He then explains, based on the so nice to see you. Welcome. He then explains that there is a chiyuv of teaching talmidim. And he defines talmidim, it's not the Rambam's own definitions, defined by Chazal, and he defines talmidim as banim, which we have to, because the only requirement in Torah is to teach banim, as it says, Vishinantam levanecha. And so we have to define that talmidim, whatever that may be, we don't know what that is yet, but whatever that is included in what the Torah terms as banim, yes? Yes. So that's who I am required to teach. Outside of that, I have no requirement to teach anything as an individual who studied Torah on my own. If I want to do a chesed and teach other people that are neither banim nor talmidim, I can do so, but it's a chesed. It's not an obligation. The requirement in Torah is to teach talmidim and banim, talmidim being defined as banim, so the only requirement is to teach banim. Now what happens is if I cannot teach my own banim, I am permitted to do what? To hire someone to do this, right? To hire someone to do this. Now the question is, as a parent, what is my requirement to teach my child? That was my original question. What am I required to teach my child? So the Rambam writes, Chayav lelamedo bischar. You have to pay for this, right? If you cannot do it yourself, you've got to pay for this. You've got to make sure that you get somebody to do this for your child. And what do they have to teach your child that you cannot teach them on your own, that you otherwise are required to teach them? Ad shikra Torah shebichtav kula. They have to learn the whole Torah shebichtav, which is the written Torah. What that includes, there's a discussion among the Farshim whether the Rambam means only the 5 books of the Torah, does it mean all 24 books of the Tanakh, and so on and so forth. But that's the requirement, which none of us keep. Let's be honest. Right? I mean, maybe you do, but I'm assuming that the majority doesn't. Yeah? So the majority of us have a problem keeping this mitzvah.
What respect?
In what respect? Well, I'm assuming, based on my minimal knowledge, that the majority of parents do not personally or financially hire anyone to teach their children all 5 books of the Torah, much less the entire Tanakh. Do I have any dissenting opinion on that? Okay, so that's a mitzvah that we're failing at. Right? That's a mitzvah that we're failing at. We teach them a whole bunch of other things, but this we do not do. That's a requirement in halakha. Yeah. So one of the reasons that we set up the yeshiva, or the what you call it, the Jewish day school, in New York this way is because this is a requirement. It ended up being that many of the students came out knowing much more than their parents, and we had to deal with that, right? Because the parents sent their kids to the school in order to be able to study this. None of the parents, very few of the parents had actually studied all 5 books of the Torah. Their kids were studying all 5 books of the Torah. That includes Vayikra, just in case you're wondering, right? Now, there used to be tradition, long time ago, that we used to start with Vayikra. Although that's minhag, that's not a chiyuv, right? The chiyuv is that they have to finish all 5 books, at the very least. And I'm gonna hold right now, just to not be daunting on ourselves, right? That we'll hold Torah Shebichtav Kula as being 5 books. Like I said, there's dissenting opinion. There are those who hold it has to be all 24 books of the Tanakh, right?
And that's
But we'll
learning
hold it on 5 books. Yes, your question.
That's learning it all inside. So
As opposed to what?
teaching them about the parasha
It's
every
called
single
what?
week
It's
is
called
not enough.
what? What is it called?
Torah Shebichtav,
There
that's
you
what I'm
are.
saying.
Yes. And I'm going to show you that it is halachic also that it has to be the actual psukim of the Torah. Yes?
If you stick strictly to the text, it says to read English. Until he knows how to read
Strictly to the English text?
the English text.
All right.
Until he knows how to read the whole written Torah. Maybe he can read
Yes.
the whole written Torah, and he's got the ability and the skills to maybe to translate it a little bit on his own. But does it say to understand fully and be able to translate the whole thing? So you can read it, read the words? Okay.
Right. And that's the only thing that we're required to do.
That's a reading skill.
I'm sorry?
Is it a reading skill?
Well, it's an interesting question.
Does he have to understand what he reads? Actually,
Doesn't
can't.
seem that he does.
They have to know how to read.
It seems that they have to know how to be koreh mikra.
But that's with the trop.
Huh?
That's the proper.
That's your assuming.
That's what I'm assuming.
Yes. People would not necessarily argue with you, but it's not what he says. You might assume that kriya includes trap. Okay, that's another discussion. We did it that way. We did it that way. Yeah, and it helps because the music helps. All right. So take a look at the first side, just to be able to draw your question further on the front of the page. This is very interesting halakha. So when do I have to start teaching my child Torah? At what point? You're going to cheat and look at the pages, right? But when do I... Hello, over here. When do I have to start teaching my child Torah? Halachically.
When you can understand.
Huh? When you can...
For men can speak.
All right. So that's halacha. The Rambam writes, "Me'matai aviv hayav lamedot Torah." At what point is the father required to teach his son Torah? Mishiyatchil ledaber. Once he starts speaking. Once he starts speaking and you can speak to the child and tell the child what to say, you have a chiyuv. So once he can speak, milamedo, you teach him. And this is halacha. Also, very few people keep the halacha accurately and appropriately, but this is halacha l'maaseh. The first thing that you must teach a child is Torah tzivah lanu Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov. That's the first thing that a child has to learn. Do they have to read it? No, they don't read yet. They speak. How old are we talking? Generally,
2,
average.
3.
2, 3 years, right? 2, 3 years old. Okay. Torah tzivah lanu Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov. After you teach them this pasuk, you have to teach them Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That has to be taught to the child in that order. After that, there's no hakpada. After that, there's no chiyuv. They have to learn all the psukim. It doesn't have to be in a specific order. So some people had minhag to teach Vayikra first. Some people had different. But these 2 psukim have to be the first 2 psukim that they learn. Achar kach namedo me'at me'at psukim. Little by little, after that, you start filling in psukim into the data bank. Right? Into the child's data bank. Ad sheyeh ben shesh or sheva, till they reach the age of 6 or 7 years old. Hakol lefi burio, you do it based on the child's capacity to be able to do this, and then molichom etzem melamed tinachot, send them to school. Sorry.
Just to be halachic and accurate here, so male or female?
It's not, it doesn't seem that you have a chiyuv to teach the girls in the Rambam's presentation of this over here, kifi Talmud Torah. Yeah? Whether the Rambam has a chiyuv to teach women, girls, Torah, on various other levels or reasons, that's a different question, because it seems from the Rambam that yes, there's no chiyuv of Talmud Torah for the girls, qua Talmud Torah, but there's a chiyuv of the girls gaining da'at. The Rambam writes this in the end of the book.
In your school, you did both the same?
We did. We did both the same, not because we felt that there was a chiyuv halachically to teach the girls, but the girls were coming to school, and we felt for various reasons that it was very important that they did learn this equally as the boys did, but not because we felt that there was a minyan of
Equal
chiyuv.
rights.
I'm sorry?
Equal rights, sort of thing.
No, not so much. Not so much. We felt that, I mean, this is not what it's about right now, but we felt that for two reasons. One, yes, there was an issue in terms of equality for the parents, but beyond that, we felt that it was very important that the girls had Torah in their hands for the modern world that they were living in and the knowledge of their own culture, history, learning, and so on and so forth. Yeah? The amazing thing is that they learned Vayikra in 4th grade, which I guess was the equivalent of year 5 here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they learned Vayikra in 4th grade. And I tell this story all the time because it was surreal. It was surreal. You know, I used to go visit, I was in every classroom every day. And I would ask questions to the kids about the psukim, you know, what was going on, what they were learning, basic pshat. We taught it pshat. They didn't learn Rashi until they were in 7th grade. They finished all 5 books of the Torah, and then they went back and learned Rashi. And they were fantastic at Rashi. They were absolutely brilliant at Rashi, because they were able to read Rashi in a pasuk and understand the koshi, right? Understand Rashi's issue with the pasuk. They didn't have, my daughter went, I mean, all my kids, except for the youngest 2, went through the system, unfortunately. But my boys and my daughter, Sarah, who's 17 now, they know always whether something's a medrash or not, because they didn't learn it with a medrash. So they know if they didn't learn it between 2 and 11 years old, it's not in the middle. Yeah, and they know all the medrashim, they know the Rashi. In any case, so some things that we understand from this halakha, right? First of all, we have to teach them psukim. So to answer the question about are they understanding the psukim that they learn, how old is the child when he's learning Torah Tzivah Lanu Moshe? 2 or 3 years old. Does he understand what Torah Tzivah Lanu Moshe is? Do they have to? No. So it seems, it's not academic. I'm looking at it only from a halachic standpoint in terms of what Torah means to us. And it's clearly not an academic issue. What we are told here is that there is value to putting words and psukim of Torah into a child's data bank, into a child's soul, into a child's heart. And that you teach these to a child. Now, what the halakha tells me is I have to learn these 2 psukim in order. Child doesn't know what these psukim mean, but they have to enter into the child's mind in this order halachically. Everything after that is fine, but I am filling the child with psukim, with words of the Torah. And so yes, if you're looking at the accurate language of the halakha in terms of reading, they have to read the psukim. And the way that we taught the psukim in school, and I used to caution the teachers about this all the time, and that's why I was in every classroom every day, because we're not messing around. This is the first exposure that these children have to Torah. And like it says in the Gemara, Shabashta kevan de'al al, that shibush, when you make a mistake, once it's on, it's on. You can erase it all you want, but it's never the same as before getting there. So they used to go in with trepidation, the teachers, when they taught, because I told them, this is the first exposure that these children are having of Torah. It's on your shoulders. And it's very specific how it was done, because according to halakha, the way that I insisted they do it, is they could tell the kids about the general gist of what it was that they were going to be reading, but the psukim had to be read first by the children, and then explained. Not vice versa. So that the first entrance into the psukim was the reading of the pasuk. And that's how he taught them. And they finished all 5 books of the Torah that way. We did teach them pshat, and the pshat was based on Rishonim. So the Zilberman actually worked very close with the Zilberman schools in Yerushalayim, who have a running pshat on all 5 books of the Torah, and we use their pshat, all based on Svarot Rishonim. So now, what I understand here is that the core issue is that I have to teach them the Mikra, they have to finish all of it, ultimately. That's my chiyuv as a parent, and that's what the child is required to do. The child gets stuck, and his parents don't teach him. We, as people, have a requirement to learn this. At the very least, right? So it's not just teaching them about the parasha. They have to read the psukim. They have to speak the psukim, or know how to read the psukim. If I can teach them pshat and psukim, fantastic. But it's not even a chiyuv. So on the broadest level, on the basic level, right, we have this concept, halachically, that nobody does anymore, and one of the reasons probably nobody does it is because it's not academic. It's a tough sell, right? But you can address this by being able to teach pshat. And you can teach pshat. I did it. I'm not saying this in some idyllic fashion, right? You know, it would be nice if we could. I did it for years. I saw hundreds of children go through this. I trained teachers to teach this. I'm telling you, it's entirely possible. We're just not doing it. We fail at doing it. But this is a chiyuv. So this creates a situation in where a child, first of all, actually receives what belongs to them. What's the first pasuk we teach them? It's morasha. It belongs to them. It's their inheritance. And we somehow think, that we are the masters of Torah and we'll decide what they should have and what they shouldn't have. It's none of our business. We're custodians. And if we're going to get into the job of teaching kids Torah, we have a chiyuv, which we are remiss, right, in doing. And so ultimately, what we have to recognize and ultimately ask ourselves is, if I am custodian and being hired by a parent, who is a big question, by the way, of lifnei ver lo titen michshol, because the parent's hiring you to teach his kids in order that they should be able to be fulfilling, you hope that they should be fulfilling mitzvah. And we're telling them, if for all intents and purposes we're fulfilling mitzvah, neither is happening. And so it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. You can answer all kinds of reasons, but this is an issue. So even if we want to explain it away and say there's this and that reason why we're not doing it, we have to address the problem. Because it's not that it isn't a problem. Can't sweep it away and say it's not a problem. It's absolutely a problem. And we have to deal with the fact that A, is it a mekach ta'ut, in that I'm selling something under a particular assumption that it's not really what it is. And two, is it a problem of They don't know any better, the parents. They don't even know what their chiyuv is. Maybe we don't know what the chiyuv is. But as educators, we have to be able to ask ourselves, am I doing what I'm supposed to do as an educator? And am I handling this hire appropriately? So this is my intent. Yeah, go ahead.
In your mind, is there any gain in covering less ground, but giving the children the ability to translate on their own, giving them those skills?
Look, it's very nice, but it's not a chiyuv. It's not a chumash. It's not a chumash lesson either.
How did you
Because what
motivate
you're
them?
doing is you're teaching them how to understand the pasuk and the chumash, but you're not teaching them chumash.
Is that not valuable in itself?
It may be, but it's not what we're required to do.
So why do you understand that it's until they're 11 years old, though? That can go right.
No, I was just telling you that's how long it took us.
It took you 11 years, but it can be done, let's say, spreading through primary school and
By all
secondary
means,
school. I mean, if they
it's absolutely. If you want to do it that way, absolutely.
I would find that more reasonable if we...
And how did you find it? How do they get motivated?
I'm sorry? Oh, that's a fantastic question. How did they get motivated? I started telling a story and I didn't finish the story. So the kids are in 4th grade, okay, year 5, girls. So I'm visiting the girls' class learning Vayikra, and they're in the middle of Tarat, right? In the middle of the process, the steps of Taharat Hatzarat, how to purify from after having Taharat. The girls know everything. I'm listening to the class, the teacher's asking them questions, they know every detail by heart. Fantastic. I'm sitting there, the assistant principal sitting there, I'm shining my hat, I'm thrilled, right? And everything's done in Hebrew. Everything's done in Hebrew. It's taught in Hebrew. These are American kids. English-speaking homes, we teach everything in Hebrew. They immersed in Hebrew from the time that they're 2 years old. So, which is the most difficult thing in the school to maintain, incidentally. You think that teaching the Mikra is a problem? That's child's play. Finding Hebrew teachers to teach in Hebrew is the most difficult thing in the world. And it was the most difficult thing as a headmaster to maintain. Really. Nobody speaks Hebrew. In any case, sitting there, and one of the girls raises her hand and she says, Hamora, at the end of the lesson, Hamora, ma nachnu hochot lilmod machar? What are we going to learn tomorrow? And the Morah says, Machar nachnu hochot lilmod tzarat habatim, nigat habatim, which is the tzarat that comes on the wall. And the girl says, yes! And I look over, and you talk about why are they motivated or how are they motivated. These children, when you fill a child with words of Torah from the time that they can speak, you don't have to motivate them. It's what they do. And they love it. And they can't wait to get to it. Every single one of them. So you see a child respond that way about hearing she's going to learn about Nigat HaBatim tomorrow morning. I'm telling you, I saw this b'mo einai. It's not the first time, not the second time, not the third time. I saw children thrilled and excited about learning. What we have to do when we don't teach children Torah is we have to find parts of it that's interesting to them and then teach them. And that's what we generally do. But when they learn Torah from the time that they're kids, they go through all of Masechet Eruvin thrilled. I'm not kidding. I'm serious. I'm telling you, I've seen it with my own eyes many times. Hundreds of children pass through my doors, and I saw them do this. So you don't have to worry about the motivation. That's what people are always worried about, motivating. You know, you have to be an engaging teacher, you know.
Even if the parents didn't appreciate it.
The parents told me, I had parents said, Rabbi, why are we teaching them Sefer Vayikra? And I said very simply to the parents who used to ask me that, because they did. They used to ask me every now and then, they'd get at the guts to come and ask me that. And I would say to them very simply, are your children coming home unhappy? No. I said, okay, if they do, please let me know. Otherwise, we have a chiyuv to teach them the whole Torah.
And there's obviously feedback from the parents.
I'm sorry?
There's obviously feedback
Yes.
from the parents and working together with the parents.
Always. Because remember, in the United States, especially in New York, this is a full tuition school.
Yes.
So the parents are paying completely for their children's education. So they just have a say in what goes on. And that's 90% of your job as a headmaster is to deal with the parents.
Interestingly enough, I went to Beis Rivka my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And Vayikra is the only chumash we didn't
Of
touch on
course.
until we got to high school.
Of course not. And I used to have to tell the teachers would come to me and say, how am I supposed to teach? I said, you have hang-ups. The kids don't. What better way to teach them within the context of Torah? And every single time a teacher would go in and they would teach it, and the kids had no issues. First time they heard these things, all within the context of Torah.
Very forward thinking.
Thank you. I don't know, maybe. I don't know if that's a thank you, but yeah.
Just to kind of clarify as well, just the whole curriculum you had, that was there other things that were taught? What was the timing that was given dedicated to this?
The core of their learning until they were 11 years old was Chumash.
And
we didn't have to teach them how to break down Shorashim and how to understand, because they were immersed in the Hebrew and they just got it. And that was it. And they came out knowing Chumash.
So a child going in every day would just be learning Chumash?
Yeah, they learned Dinim, like they learned Chagim, and there was a curriculum for Chagim. And by the time that they reached 5th grade, which is year 6, they started with Mishnah. And they finished Mishnah by the time that they finished.
And how much time was dedicated to
They finished Seder Moed.
How much time was dedicated to the Chumash curriculum?
The majority of their Hebrew hours, of the Kodesh hours.
How many was that?
How many was that? Probably more than you have on your hands. But it doesn't matter, so you extend it like, extend.
What, half a day?
More or less. More or less, not exactly. Not exactly. Probably about a third of the day.
No, because I went through the school.
Probably about a third of the day. Probably about a third. All right, so the question is, right, if you can't do this, for whatever reason, I don't know that there's a good reason, but if you can't do this, what are we left with? What does this do? In other words, if you end up educating a child this way, what does it do to the child? It changes the child. Because first of all, the child actually has the Torah that belongs to them. They actually have it. There's not a mitzvah in the Torah they haven't learned. There's not a pasuk in the Torah they haven't read over. They don't know it like the Zilberman kids, I'll admit that. And where the Zilberman kids can, you say, psok li psukcha, tell me your pasuk that you're learning. They do it. The American kids I didn't have that kind of time. I wasn't learning 364 days a year. But they knew their Torah. There wasn't a place in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah or an aspect of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah they weren't familiar with. They didn't learn, they didn't know, that they didn't, and we used to do parasha also. So they would review, it was done with review. So there wasn't a parasha in the Torah, they didn't have an idea of the general outline of what was going on in that parasha. There wasn't a mitzvah in the Torah that they didn't learn about.
Are there any
So
that are inappropriate, you think, for primary school? You think the details of the story of Dinah, or?
We taught it in very matter-of-fact ways, without having to go through, flowery descriptions of what was going on. But yeah, we taught it, and we taught it to hundreds of kids. And the thing is that, and this is, people will have difficulty with it, because we all have problems, because we didn't learn it that way. But I'm saying again, when you learn information within a context of Torah, it maintains its sanctity. I don't know how else to say it. I could just tell you that experientially I've seen it over and over and over again. Yeah.
In a lesson, would the teacher say the psukim, or would the children have it?
Yes, the teacher would say the pasuk and the kids would repeat the pasuk. And we would use Koran Chumashim, big Koran Chumashim, because I wanted them to see the parashiyot. Yeah. And that's what we used with time. So what happens is that you have a child that is thinking within a framework of Torah, without them even realizing it. And people used to say this to me all the time. For 6 years that I was involved in the school for 10, but I was headmaster for 6 years. People regularly used to come to me and say, your kids, we know the Barkai kids, they think differently. And I would just smile, because how are you supposed to put your finger on that? Like, what makes them think differently? And I'm telling you, it makes them think differently. Because without realizing it, they think from within a framework of Torah. They can't help it, right? They just are exposed to the entirety of Torah. It's in their hearts. It's part of the way that they think. I realized, though, that there was one issue that was missing. And I instituted it very early, even before I became headmaster of the school, as I was one of the head teachers in the school. And that was that with all that they were learning, it was very much in their hearts, but they had difficulty articulating some key ideas. So they felt things were right and wrong. They recognized that certain things were a certain way and how they were supposed to approach things, but they had difficulty articulating. And so this brings me to the question of principles. Because I did believe, and I still do, that in a sense of thought and general outlook, principles of Jewish life and ultimately within the framework of the Torah are received if you teach a child the entirety of Torah. But they're not well articulated. And so I decided that I was going to provide them a means of articulation. So what did I do? I taught them the 13 principles. The 13 principles of Rambam. That's principles, right? And to me, what was important was to be able to provide those kids, because I didn't have a high school. I only had the primary school. And I was hoping, banking on the fact that they had a strong enough yesod that wherever they went, they would be able to take that with them. I used to track them. I'm not there anymore, but I used to make the admissions director, I asked the admissions director to track the alumni, to see where they're going to school, how they're doing in school. I had very good relationships with all the high schools in New York, where they went to. And I tracked them even after school, after they graduated high school. It's 4 years, blink of an eye. And whether they were in the Israeli army or they were going to work straight away or they were going to university, or what was happening with these kids. Yeah. And the amazing thing is that the Torah was strong with them, all of them. Some of them were more observant, some of them were less observant. But all of them had this amazing Yirat Shamayim. And they had the 13 principles. And I know because they still maintain relationship with me. So I still get WhatsApps from my students that are in now, finished university already and whatever it is, and they're texting me. And the questions that they ask are still rooted in their knowledge of the 13 principles and ultimately the elements of Torah that they know. Some of them are very average kids. You think that they're not crazy religious kids, all of them. Some of them very average kids, but they have this knowledge going on in their head. And so they maintain these relationships and these questions and this understanding. So I taught them 13 principles because there's another issue. And that is, when we have Jewish children in our care, we can teach them data and make the data the core of their learning, the information, or we can teach them principles. and make the principles the core of their learning. That's not to say that it has to be in lieu of data. But what is the value of teaching principles as the bedrock or center piece of their learning as opposed to data? I ask you, and I'm assuming it, but I'm asking you, if you had to answer that question, what's the value of teaching principles over data? Yeah.
You can apply it infinitely, whereas data is restricted in scope.
Yeah. Simply put. Principles can be used to understand all data. In other words, if it is a framework of thought, as opposed to a specific thought, I can filter all of my learning into that framework and see it from that perspective. That's why I have that Margaret Mead quote at the top. Children should be taught how to think, not what to think. Now, we hold that they should be taught data, of course. That's the key, the economy. But the data has to be all the data, not pieces of the data. Because when you teach them all the data, they have more than just the data, because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so they have an entire framework of Torah that's working and swimming in their heads, if you can do that. And that's why I put this psukim on, right? How does the Rambam open his Mishneh Torah? This is his goal, right? He says confidently, he goes, you want to read the Torah Shebechtav? Fantastic. Read the Torah Shebechtav, and then read my book, and you've got it all down. I mean, it was very bold. But he did say this. So he opens his book saying, in Tehillim 119.6, right, Kuf Yutet, Az lo evosh b'habiti el kol mitzvotecha. I will not be shamed, embarrassed, however you want to explain the evosh, right? It's clearly a lack of pride. But I will not have to worry about my pride in front of you, God, as I look at all your mitzvot. Not your mitzvot, kol mitzvot. Or as it says in another pasuk in Tehillim 19, Mishpatei Adonai emet tzedku yachdav. That when I see all the mitzvot together, intertwined as one system, they are tzedek, I see the righteousness. If I start isolating bits and pieces and editing Torah to little snippets, I lose it. And it's a dangerous thing. And who decides really which snippets we're supposed to give them and which ones we're not? And who decides what's right for them to have and what isn't right for them to have? It's a serious, serious responsibility. And one that all of us as educators will have to answer for at one time or another as to what we decide to give and didn't decide to give. And you say what?
You imagine that the children are going to be switched off when we do the Kabbalahs. That's what I think.
Yeah, but that's a mistake. It's a mistake. You imagine. That's the point. You imagine a whole bunch of things. We all imagine a whole bunch of things, but it's not true. You think they're not going to be switched off when they learn about the Mishkan? We're switched off learning about the Mishkan. Try teaching it to the kids. If we don't like it, they're not going to like it. But I'm telling you, kids start learning about building and materials and the gold and the silver and how this stuff was dyed and how the measurements worked out. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. We don't like it, so we assume they don't like it. And we don't like it because we never learned it within the context of Torah. Or at all. We were convinced that, Rav Yaakov Weinberg was Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore. And he didn't like Sesame Street. He didn't like Sesame Street. And the reason he didn't like Sesame Street was because he said that it taught children to always think that learning is fun. And it isn't. It's just not always fun. But you gotta learn. So if you can make it engaging, chazak u'baruch, as we say in the Sephardi world, right? But if you can't, you still gotta learn. You need to know information, right? So we don't, that's a thing, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I used to say this to the teachers and the parents all the time. We don't have faith in Torah. We think we do, but we don't. We think it's horribly boring and miserable. At least parts of it. And we're afraid to teach it. And you shouldn't be. Give it more credit. This is what used to happen with Daf Yomi. Like in the early days of Daf Yomi. Nobody wanted to learn Daf Yomi. They were very worried about the Daf Yomi, Who learns Daf Yomi? Balabatim. You had to hide your Gemara if you were learning Daf Yomi in the early days, Chas v'sholom. And then all of a sudden we found out people like learning. And it spreads. What? People actually like learning? It's unbelievable. Herman Wouk he has this fantastic anecdote that he tells in The Will to Live On. He learns Daf Yomi, permanently. He's still living, God bless him, 101 years old in Palm Springs. May he live well and long. And you know, he writes about this interaction that he had with Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was a very well-known physicist, brilliant physicist. Jewish physicist, not particularly observant in any way. And he was convinced, Luke, that just by being Richard Feynman and being a Jew and a thinker, that he could engage him in a sugya on Shiluach HaKen in the Talmud. And he just tells him generally like what the sugya is about, and immediately Feynman gets into those. He goes, well, the implications of the situation you're telling me would be A, B, or C. And, you know, and he got into an entire discussion on it. It wasn't a question of what are you talking to me about. It was like an automatic entrance into the whole sugya. And he writes it this way in The Will to Live On. He goes, look, it's just, this is what we are. It's the way that we're about. We give much less credit to Jewish souls than we should. And to the Torah, for that matter. It's a fantastic thing, Torah. It's brilliant. Give it more credit. So the question then is, if I cannot give my kids all of Torah, at least give them how to think. At least give them a framework. Give them the principles from which they can filter or at least ascertain, define their world. Because when you give the framework, or when you give principles, you give them capacity, infinite capacity, to measure and assess information. It's through the frame of reference that information has its value. So if I can create a robust frame of reference for the child, then I've done something, at least. B'diavad, but I've done it. If not as an addition. So what I started to teach them the Shlosh Ikarim. Every single child that left that yeshiva knew the Shlosh Ikarim, not just by heart. They understood because we spent an entire year teaching them. And I taught them not only the Ikarim, but how one plays into the next, and why are these Ikarim, and why do we need these Ikarim as Ikarim, and so on and so forth. But I didn't test them on all of that information. I tested them on the key Ikarim and key points. And I used to highlight key points on each one, even though I engaged in broad discussion with them about all of these, because a lot trickles in. When they went to interviews in the high schools called me more often than not and said, you know, I'm sitting down and I'm asking the kids, what is the most interesting thing? And they keep telling me, Shlosh Ikarim. And I did this with 13-year-olds. Everything, from 1 to 13, the whole thing. And they said, how did you do this? And I told them how I did it. And they said, well, what do you think about our Jewish philosophy department? We're doing, surveys of Jewish philosophy, and, they feel very guilty, the high schools, because they feel like if they don't teach the kids everything that's said about any particular subject of Jewish philosophy, they failed. And what I said to them was, I think that's a mistake. That they'll read, ultimately they will, they won't, I don't know. But give them a system of thought. Choose something, doesn't matter. You want to choose the Rambam, choose the Rambam. You want to choose the Ben Ezra, choose the Ben. You want to choose the whatever it is that you want to choose. But give them a system of thought. Give them something. Oh no, we can't do that. All right. But that's the question. Do we teach principles? Or do we teach data? Not one or the other. What's the cornerstone of what it is that we're giving to the children? What is equipping them for the life that they're going to live? When they go to university, should we be worried? Or should we equip them with a filter, with a framework, with a capacity to be able to assimilate information and use it appropriately within a framework of Torah? So what does the Rambam say? It's the most beautiful thing. He writes that you blink, you miss it. In his Pirush HaMishnah, the last thing he writes in Masechet Brachot, in the Pirush HaMishnah, he says, look, I just want to tell you, because this is after he's gone through a whole question of Olam Haba, and what's the afterlife and all of this. And he goes, by the way, you may think that I'm kind of veering from the subject here. And he says, I just want to let you know, before we go any further, Darki tamid bechol makom. My way, always, in every place, sheyesh ez remez binyanei umuna avaer mashu. If there's even a hinting to questions of faith, meaning what it is that I believe, how that is that I think, I'm going to explain something about it, even though it's not central to